Welcome to this video session covering double overlay doors, specifically measuring the face frame opening width and height, which is the basis for door sizing, preferences, choice of rail, stile, and overlay widths, inter-door gap, and the tongue length that impact the calculations. Calculations are the formula that use the measurements and preferences and are required to ensure the doors fit correctly. The purpose of measuring and calculating is to determine rail and stile length, panel height and width, and overall door width and height. This information can then be used when milling and ordering double overlay doors. An example will be used to demonstrate a face frame, the door components, and the final results. If we look at this from the front, a face frame is overlaid by the doors. The doors sit in front of and overlay on the top, bottom, and both sides of the face frame. The components are two stiles, two rails, and a panel per door. A stile consists of a profile, looking at it from the top here. Of interest then is the depth of this groove in which the tongue will fit. The groove and the profile runs from the top all the way to the bottom of each stile. The groove then is used both for the rail and the panel. There will be a tongue on the end of each rail that fits inside that groove. Likewise, there's a tongue on the sides of the panel that fits inside that same groove. Here is a rail which, as mentioned, has a tongue on each end, has a groove exactly like the stile did, into which the panel will fit. The groove in the stile and rail are cut usually by the same router bit. A different router bit is used to cut what's called the coping cut on the ends of each rail. The panel then, as mentioned, has a groove that runs all the way around the perimeter of the panel. In this case, it's a raised panel for the door. This is usually cut by a panel cutter. In most cases, or hopefully, the panel has a back cutter which can cut this in the back as well. The panel itself then floats inside the door frame composed of the two stiles and the two rails. To begin, measure the width of the face frame opening and also measure the height of that face frame opening, and finally record those because those will be used throughout the calculation. So here the face frame opening height and width have been recorded in this table, height being 22.5 inches and the width being 29 inches. Next, some preferences must be recorded because they also affect the calculations. First thing needed is how much will these doors overlay the face frame on the top, bottom, and each side. For this example, the horizontal and vertical overlay will be a 1/2 inch top, bottom, left, and right. The next preference needed will be how wide, each stile, how wide is each rail. For this example, we'll make each rail width 2 inches and each stile 2 inches as our preference. Next preference needed is how long will this tongue length, which protrudes from each rail into the stile, How long will that be? Or in other words, how deep will the groove in the stiles and rails be? For this example, we will use 3/8 of an inch for the preferred tongue length. The tongue length on the end of each rail will fit snugly into the groove on each stile. However, due to seasonal temperature and humidity considerations, the tongue that goes around the edges of the panel will not fit snugly, but rather float some distance inside the groove on the stiles and rails. For this example, the preferred inset for that will be, as is recorded here, 1/16 of an inch. The final preference needed will be, so that the doors don't collide when opening and closing, is what is the distance of the gap between the left hand and right hand door. For this example, we're going to use 3/32 of an inch. That preference then is also recorded here. Now that the face frame opening height and width measurements have been taken and we've established our preferences for the overlays and so forth, next thing needed will be the formulas for actually doing the calculations. Now that the measurements and preferences have been recorded, those will be used in these formulas to calculate these 5 things: the stile length, the door width, the rail length, panel width, and the panel height. 3 approaches can be used to perform the calculation. Each approach uses the same formula. Approach 1, manually, in other words, do the math, likely using some sort of calculator. This requires some effort. Here's an example for the measurements and preferences that we've previously recorded. I won't drag you through each of these. That could be a separate video perhaps, but it results in those 5 things that we mentioned before: the stile length, door width, and so forth. It's done here both in terms fractionally as well as using decimals. Rather than doing the math, the second approach will be to use Microsoft Excel, which automates the calculations, makes it easy to adjust if we should decide to change our mind on the face frame width, height, or the preferences. And of course, if the formula are entered correctly, reduces or even eliminates the chance of math errors. For example, because there was that drawer above our opening, possible that if we overlay too much, there could be a collision between the doors and the shelf. So perhaps we want to reduce the vertical overlay from 1/2 an inch to, let's say, 3/8 of an inch. Of course, Microsoft Excel will make all those adjustments for us. Similarly, each of these other measurements and preferences could be changed because the formula below make use of those, and Excel will adjust as required. So far, we've seen the formula to do the math manually, how to do it in Excel. The third approach would be to use a computer-assisted design or CAD package, in this example, Fusion 360. Using exactly the same formula that were used to do the math manually or in Excel, the parameters are put here into the CAD package and adjustments are made on the fly. The advantage being we can actually visualize these changes. So for example, if the face frame were not 29 but let's say 35 inches high, we can make that adjustment and watch it change. Just as we did in Excel, we could change other things as needed and we can then visualize what happens and make sure that the relative size of the components look pleasing visually. Additionally, besides being able to change the parameters, the components in this model are joined together into relative positions, and finally it's possible to produce out of most CAD packages 2D shop drawings, which can be used to go out and actually build this ourselves or send off to someone else to do the milling for us. This example shows the front, a stile, a rail, panel in 2D, along with the measurements necessary to build the thing. To wrap up this session, we've seen several things. The measurements and preferences that go into the calculation of the rail and stile length, as well as the panel height and width. 3 different approaches that all use exactly the same formula, same measurements, same preference. Approach 1 was do the math, which was a bit tedious and error-prone. The second was to use Microsoft Excel. This eliminates math errors, permits adjustments of parameters, but doesn't do the visualization for us. And the third one, which does everything that the prior two do, which was to use the Computer Assisted Design Package, or CAD, in our example, Fusion 360. Formula exactly the same as approaches 1 and 2, except now we're able to also visualize, resize, generate 2D drawings, and easily share those with others involved in the project. Please indicate what follow-on sessions might be useful. Double overlay doors are not the only possible types that you need to do this type of thing. For example, inset doors, full overlay, single door. Someone also might be interested in a full walkthrough of the CAD model and how to do that. What I'll ask you to do is please make comments below. And finally, thanks so much for watching.